Hello and welcome back to the Exist Better YouTube channel. This is like my 14,000th attempt to make a video today, but I think we finally got it. I just want to talk about emotional processing because it's one of those things that everyone mentions, but nobody ever talks about how you do it or what it is or what it's not. It doesn't really matter how self-aware or smart you are. Even everyone I've talked to who is very much aware and, emotionally intelligent, they still, a lot of the time, are just like, how do I do it? What is it? I don't know how, I don't understand, So it's not something that really comes natural to people. You were never taught to do this. Emotional processing is the heart of shadow work. If you're into shadow work, if you're into psychology, if you're into the concept of the subconscious, but you are not doing any emotional processing, you're really just interested on a surface level. You're not really getting in there and doing the work. So it's more of a hobby, So real quick, I just want to talk about what emotional processing is not, so you can understand the difference between all these things. So 1, emotional processing is not parts work, usually. Parts work is a process. So I made a video in the past where I labeled it something parts work. And then in the video, I actually ended up just doing I didn't really do parts work for the most part. So I thought it was kind of confusing. So I thought I would specify here. What I did in that shadow work demonstration video or whatever it was called was that was more like processing work. Parts work is where you are in your mind for the most part. Typically, that's what ends up happening. So when you're doing parts work, you are tapping into different parts of your consciousness and speaking only from that part to get an understanding of that part. Now, people who don't do parts work very much, or even if you do, what ends up happening a lot of the time is you end up speaking from the manager position. So the central part of you that just sort of manages your consciousness. And this is especially this is extra true for really smart intellectual type people. Their manager is always strong as shit. Let's say I say, okay, we're gonna go into the part of you that feels a lot of shame. And without even realizing it, your manager could swoop in and be like, well, I believe that the part of me that feels a lot of shame thinks this and they feel this, and I notice that they always do this. No, that's not it. That's the manager taking over and being, bossy and running the show. We want to actually talk to the part that is feeling the shame. Usually it will have a totally different persona. It won't have this persona of I'm a professional, I know all about my you have this representative of your consciousness. IFS therapists, they call it the manager, and they're always steering clients back toward, no, let the manager rest for a minute. We're talking to this part, right? Because certain parts get steamrolled all the time and other parts always get to talk. Long story short, parts work is when you're usually in your mind, identified as one aspect of yourself and you're talking. Now, if this goes deep enough, it could totally turn into emotional processing, but in my experience, it usually doesn't, at least not for me. When I'm doing parts work, I'm in my head. It's very logical, I'm gaining understanding. It's not typically a really emotional process. It's a logical process. Again, this could differ from person to person, depending on how naturally you separate your emotions from your thoughts. So generally speaking, I believe emotional processing isn't parts work. 2, emotional processing is not philosophizing. If you are philosophizing about your own self and self-awareness, I'm a Capricorn and perhaps that's why I keep having this problem. Great, but that's not emotional processing. It's fine to do, but it's not going to have a healing effect on you. Last thing that's not emotional processing. This is very common in traditional talk therapy and counseling. Most people have a tendency to talk about experiences in their life, like work, relationships, dating, other people in their life that are causing them problems, how upset they are about those other people, and that tends to dominate the conversation very easily in typical counseling therapy sessions. This is also not emotional processing. However, like I said about parts work, if someone is very open and ready to change, what I've noticed is they can go into emotional processing very naturally. So, and this happens in therapy, right? Someone's talking about their day, and then as the conversation goes on, and the counselor has to know how to ask the right questions and keep things on track. But if they do that, the person will often go into like a hole of trauma, and they're like, oh shit, and then they're like crying and they're like releasing, and they realize that stupid thing that they were just talking about that happened that day or something is actually tied to something much deeper, and they weren't even in touch with it until they start talking. It's really something that counselors need to be aware of, and they need to be steering people back toward emotional processing. It's fine to just talk, and it's fine to get emotional support. But if you're trying to change specific patterns and specific things in yourself, it's really important for both the counselor and the client to be aware that some amount of emotional processing should be taking place. Whether it's inside or outside of the session, I would say doesn't really make a difference, although if the person's trauma is centered around isolation, that can take a while to unravel, but ideally they would be processing that stuff with another person. The very things that you don't want to talk about are what you need to talk about. So the very things that you don't want to feel are the things that you need to feel. It's almost like the less you want to do it, the more you have to do it. Because the fact that if you have an aversion to that, it's like life is just going to make you do it. I consider emotional processing to be, one thing it usually is cathartic. It's releasing. It's self-compassion inducing. There's an alleviation typically of feelings of guilt, shame, grief, a purge sensation, like a cleansing and relief sensation. There are some modalities you can do, like maybe EFT, something like that, where you're just doing a process and you're feeling feelings and you're trying to purge the feelings. That's great. That's an example of emotional processing. Me, like, coming from the slant of like subconscious work, Jungian psychology, it's like a modality that's very all about the why. Why is this happening to you? The why doesn't matter to some people. Like, they don't care why. But from my perspective, I want to know why. I want to know why this is happening to me. I want to know why now, what happened in the past that caused this, why. I want a logical explanation. Emotional release is great, but if you don't know why something happened to you, it's like your life story. If you don't know the story of your life, you don't know yourself, because, if one person grew up and they experienced a lot of isolation, another person grew up, they experienced a lot of rejection, a third person grew up, they experienced a lot of maybe like movement and insecurity and uncertainty, and so on and so on. All of those experiences are going to be very, very shaping, right? They're going to shape you. So if let's say you have panic attacks or something, and it could be caused by any of those scenarios I just mentioned, you can release the emotions associated with that over and over as many times as you need to. But if you don't know why, those emotions are happening. For example, it was the instability when you were growing up. It was the isolation. It was this. It was that. You see what I mean? Like, you've got no self-knowledge. You have no self-understanding. You don't know how to prevent those things in the future. You don't know how to meet your own unmet needs. It's just like a big question mark, right? So this is why I prefer the more psychoanalytic perspective, because for whatever reason that perspective illuminates the why. It's very why focused versus something like cognitive behavioral therapy. All they want to do is like flip you over to a better experience. So for emotional processing, we have the catharsis, the release. Usually there's crying. Crying is very important because it lowers your cortisol levels and it gives you like a physical reset. So for people who are like, oh, I always feel this way, I never can feel any different. If you want to feel different, the fastest and easiest way to do that is to get really, 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 really comfortable with crying. I cry all the time. Like, this is like, I actually like try to hold back sometimes because I feel like people just like, people who have to be around me, like, they just don't understand and they're just like, oh my God, this is like a nightmare. Because I mean, it's still obviously like if I'm out in public or something, it's still going to be like embarrassing. Like I'd rather do it at home by myself if I'm processing something. But I have like no guilt or shame whatsoever around processing, at least by myself. Like it's just like, and especially for women, like with the hormonal system, like when your cortisol gets high, like you're talking about something that's traumatic, right? Your cortisol gets high, and then if you cry, it goes back down to normal, and it's like the stress is completely gone. It's a stress valve, right? So if you hold back from crying, it's very bad for you. Now, when I was talking a minute ago about the why it's important to get that understanding of like, why am I like this? Why are these things happening? You get that from re-experiencing memory. So this is like the part 2. Emotional processing is all about, obviously, releasing emotions, experiencing compassion for yourself, crying if you need to, just having that like cathartic reset sort of experience. To make that even, so like I said, you could do that with like EFT, and there's all these different modalities. There's meditations for this stuff. But to make that way more powerful and impactful, you couple it with re-experiencing memory. So when you're getting triggered by something in your life, emotions start coming up. Instead of just strictly like trying to drain yourself of the emotions and move through them and purge them, you can bring in this element of re-experiencing early memories. And what that does is it gives you the why. It gives you the story behind the emotions and why it's like a skipping CD. Now, your intuition will do this for you. So this is why I always recommend the completion process to people, because it's, from what I've seen, there's really no more direct and powerful way to just get this stuff processed. So you're re-experiencing the emotion and you're re-experiencing the memory of the original, of the start date of the pattern, right? So you may have all these, it's like a ripple effect, like all these experiences in your life that look the same, feel the same, mostly they just feel the same. And it keeps happening and happening. You want to go back to the first one. You want to see that beginning. Your subconscious holds those memories, and your intuition will show you the memories if you sit down and you're ready to see them. It's a highly intuitive process. So if you don't have a lot of experience with intuition, you're going to learn through doing this. Your subconscious will present to you sensory memories, right? Sensory memories like sight, feel, like touch, smell, mostly, usually like visual stuff. When I do this, I always get like visual, and I always get tactile, like I remember being 5 years old and like something I was touching will just come back to me like it's in my hands again. And I'm like, whoa, I remember like holding that glass of water and it felt like this and it was really smooth and there was this little, like chip out of the glass at the bottom, and all that will come back. So that's how your consciousness starts to reform memory. Doing the steps in the completion process, you stop the skipping CD and you see it in its totality and you feel it in its totality. And then from there, the circumstance can change. It's not to say that the next day you're going to have this amazing life and everything's going to be completely different. I mean, sometimes it might feel that way, but generally it basically just gives you permission to now make gradual changes. When you give that complete awareness, complete compassion, and you gain full understanding, the traumatic pattern has permission to resolve itself because you've provided safety. And in somatic work, nothing can happen without safety, right? No matter how bad you want to change something, in somatic work, they're very good with this. They know that if there's no physical safety, nothing can happen. You can't change anything, you can't feel better. When you re-experience the memories and you like resettle the nervous system, then the body just goes, oh, okay, I guess we moved on from that. During the emotional processing and the re-experiencing of a memory, conscious you joins the lost aspect of you, the one that's stuck. If you watch Stranger Things, it's like the part of you that's stuck in the upside down. You have to rejoin with that part. Like, you have to go into the upside down and you get that part and you bring it back out into the daylight, right? That's how people get rescued. In Stranger Things, they don't just leave them in the upside down and like yell through the wall like, are you okay? Is everything all right in there? Okay, like we're gonna go. No, you gotta go in and join them and get them and experience the hell with them and then bring them back out, right? So that's what emotional processing work is. If you want to learn more about shadow work in general, if you want to learn more about societal conditioning, societal constructs, subscribe to this channel. Check out my website below. Check out my shadow work sessions if you want to start doing some of this work yourself. And that is it. I'll see you next time, guys.